In what ways are you looking kindly after yourself? Right? That question stopped me cold when Dr. Amelia Bueche asked it. And here's the thing, if you're a physician listening to this right now, if your career has quietly become your entire identity, if you've spent years, maybe decades, caring for everyone else while your own needs got shoved to the bottom of the list, this next hour could change how you see yourself. Absolutely, positively. So here's what you need to know about my guest today. Dr. Amelia Bueche is a board certified osteopathic physician who helps physicians and high achievers rediscover themselves beyond medicine and their work. She's the voice behind This Osteopathic Life, and she's the person I want you talking to when the achievements stop feeling like enough. Now, I have to tell you how we met because it matters. A few years back, when I was still living in Traverse City, shout out Traverse City, I practiced yoga at a studio called Dharmasala, shout out Dharmasala. And after class one evening, a group of us were just sitting on the couch, casually talking. And that's where Amelia and I met. And here's what I remember. In a profession where everyone seems to be moving at full speed, and she can move fast, where every physician I know is running from one thing to the next, Amelia had this grounded presence, calm, rooted, fully there. The kind of presence that makes you slow down without even realizing you're doing it. And when I shared that I coach physicians with their money and that a huge part of that work is helping them reduce burnout, something clicked on the spot because she was doing the same work from a different angle. I was working on the money side, she was working on the identity side, right? Same physician, same problem, different entry points. So here's what we get into today, the high achiever trap, why the very things that got you into medical school might be the same things quietly hollowing you out. We talk about the concept of mothering, not as a role, but as the act of looking after something kindly. We talk about worthiness, boundaries, discernment, and she gives you a framework I've already started using in my own life: rest, rejuvenate, deplete. 3 buckets, 10 minutes with a pen. It might change how you spend your next week. Here's the thing. You've spent years caring for others with precision and expertise. It's time someone cared for your life with that same level of intention. That's what this conversation is about. So grab a pen, you're going to want one, and let's welcome Dr. Amelia Bueche to the A Life Well Lived, a physician's guide to wealth podcast. Amelia, welcome, and I will see you on the other side, my friend. Amelia, welcome. You recently mentioned to me about the concept of mothering, which I thought was really unique, not as a role, but as the act of looking after something kindly.
Mhm.
Why do you think the people who spend their lives caring for everyone else, being our physician or listener who's with us right now, physician listener, struggle to offer that same care to themselves? And what does that mean to you?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that through. And I was reflecting on this. This was actually the topic of my original blog post, I think in 2015 on Mother's Day, right? I thought about writing about this concept and it came through as a memory in May of this year, I think right when we talked and scheduled this session.
Yeah.
And I think particularly in the practice of medicine, we're literally taught, right, to focus outward and to care for other people. And so we often miss that for ourselves. And I think the idea of mother is often just held for this particular subset. Maybe it's a bio mom or adoptive mom, but looking at all the ways we mother or we are mothered, and there's that invitation, like who have you looked after kindly and who looks kindly after you? And then, right, that third question is, and in what ways are you looking kindly after yourself? And it's one that
Hmm.
we can't miss, but one that we often do because it is, we expect others to meet our needs and we focus on turning outward to serve others. And really, that is a necessary step. And it doesn't mean we don't have needs or to have other people to serve us or take care of us, but we have to have that core space of how am I actually looking after myself or even understanding what it is I need. And that question I find often stumps a lot of physicians. Like, what do you need or want? I get a lot of blank stares because we're often taught to look outward and to focus that on what do other people need from me. And we lose all sense of concept that, oh, I'm allowed to have needs or wants, and it's possible to have them met both internally and externally.
I absolutely love that, and this is exactly off the first question why I wanted to have you on the show after you and I connected, and why I talk on this Physician Money podcast about your health is your wealth and don't be the richest one in the graveyard, because that happens
Mm,
to a lot of human beings, especially physicians who are very focused on taking care of others. And I think that's a great. I'm all about action on this podcast. So for
mhm,
the listener right now, just right out of the gate, pause this and ask yourself, in what ways are you focusing on taking care of yourself? What ways
mhm,
am I focusing on taking care of myself? And then just reflect on it, write it down. Action right out of the gate. I love it.
mhm. I love
So
that
let's talk
too.
a little bit about the high achiever trap. And I'm going to be probably taking some notes and listening to this after, because I'm sure I fall into this category often. That's why I met Amelia at the yoga studio in Traverse City.
Mhm,
And that's probably why I do yoga. So I keep myself calm and, and grounded, and
mhm.
not just be a psycho running around all the time. But let's help listeners recognize themselves. Why do high performers become disconnected from themselves?
Absolutely. So it's really a build on that first question, right? So our focus is outward, our focus is on achievement, and there could be a whole host of reasons, right? We may not be tapping into the coaching or therapy, or wounded place from this, but it is like what is driving us to achieve and what allows us to become successful. And sometimes those can support our own care for ourselves and connection, and sometimes they can totally take us out of it. Now, if we are, in the practice of medicine and continuing to achieve, to grow, to learn, and it is nourishing to us internally, we can have that both and experience. Sometimes, and I would say probably a majority of time for physicians, it is because we think we need a title or that next board certification or this
Hmm.
award or this many hours or this much money and this many patients and these RVUs and this perception in society. And there's no sense of like what actually is true of me and what is most valuable for me internally. And it's not to say achievement doesn't matter and we can't own it and be proud of it. But if that is the only marker of success or health in our lives, there's often a sense of hollowness and we lose sight of what actually matters to us internally. So we can have all of those pieces. And also looking at what allowed us to be successful in that way, those external achievements and the high, grade levels and awards and all those pieces, are they actually successful in building physical health, relationship health? And sometimes, again, the answer can be yes. A lot of times it's no, because we have to put blinders on and we have to be very unilaterally focused to get to those levels of achievement. And if we want to expand the health into other arenas of our life, it requires us to take the blinders off and to start to relearn and to not have all the answers. Things like relationships don't have inherent answers within them, and that can be really challenging. And so it requires us to step out of the operating system that has got us a lot of success.
Hmm.
And that can be really scary because it's like, why would I stop doing all these things that got me to where I am? But if the answer is because you want different results in other areas of your life, you may very well have to. And it doesn't undermine your success. It can actually help you grow and enrich and hopefully make it actually more sustainable.
I love that. Why to you
Mhm.
does responsibility and or achievement quietly become one's identity?
Absolutely. So even just it's your title, right? If you're a doctor, right, all of the time you're doctor this, doctor that, doctor whatever your name is or this specialty. And then there's a sense of like, is that all that I am? And it has a lot of high value, right? And it is very meritable. But we can start to say again, like, what is it underneath this? And I talk a lot to physicians about this idea of never one thing. And it's also a beautiful song by May Earlywine, right? Musician here in Traverse City. And it's one of my own personal mantras. And if I think back to the entry to medical school, in general, and I would say largely across the board, to get into medical school, you didn't just do one thing, right? You did a whole bunch of things, right, to make you an ideal candidate. And then a lot of times we make that first step into the medical school space and abandon the rest of it. 'Cause it's like, okay, right, this requires my full attention and energy and focus. And so it doesn't matter that I was a musician or an athlete or a teacher or a philosopher in this previous life, right? I have to really dive into this. And I would challenge my physician colleagues, and I have, to bring those things with you. And it doesn't mean you have to do them to the same extent. For me, I'm a musician. I stopped playing cello right when I got to medical school just because it didn't seem like there was enough time for it. And then ironically, when I got to my first rotation, my attending was reading this article in the New England Journal of Medicine that playing a string instrument helps stimulate your brain and make you better at test taking. And I thought, well, that was a really silly time, right, to stop playing a string instrument
Classic.
and bring yourself with you. So again, you're not going to take your guitar into the OR, but you can remember that you're a musician and you can have those other pieces of identity to support you in those spaces. And it actually will strengthen your practice of medicine, or it brings more humanity into that space, whether that's your interface with your patients or how you interact with staff, or even just having a little more compassion for yourself. I'm not
Hmm.
just a surgeon, even though surgeon is a powerful space to be. I'm all of these things. And I'm bringing that right into this professional space with me.
And who are you if it's
Mhm.
taken away? Like, who is
Mhm.
James if this
Yeah.
podcast, I am wealth, everything AI takes
Mhm.
over and I can no, I'm
Mhm.
just kidding.
Yeah.
Maybe. Why
Right.
why do successful people struggle to slow down from your observations? I'm
Yeah,
guilty of
this
this.
yeah. Well, I'll share this as a personal anecdote. So I'm a again, number one thing, very busy human, and movement has been for me all of my life. I actually found a journal, and I don't actually remember this in real time, but I would go to step class like before high school, and then I would go to class, and then I would practice a sport, and then play music, all day long. And that was pretty pathognomonic throughout the course of my life. And I suffered an abdominal tear in 2018, I think it was, and I was at my peak level of fitness. I owned a CrossFit gym at the time, teaching 20 classes a week, working 60 hours at my clinic,
Wow.
raising my kids, all these things. And if you didn't know, the only treatment for an abdominal tear is 100% rest. Like you can't walk. They let me see my patients wearing an abdominal binder, but I had to stay seated on a stool. I obviously couldn't coach any of my classes. And so that was 6 weeks mandated, just stillness. And for a person who is highly dependent on movement, it was both torturous and an incredible gift because it
Yeah.
allowed me the time to look at my life. And I would say that successful people often will keep moving because we aren't comfortable, right, with sitting with ourselves or sitting with
Mm,
feelings, or we associate that we are only worthy if we're doing something, achieving something, producing something, right, seeing patients. Well, what if we're just worthy being here? And that
mm.
doesn't mean never do anything again, but it's reestablishing the foundation that you are a worthy human. And I think about that from newborn babies, right? We don't say, man, you can't walk yet. Like, we don't want you here, right? It's just, we love you and you're beautiful and perfect, however
Right.
you are, because you exist. And that continues with us, right? Into different stages of life. And you can still have goals and be successful, but to do that from the foundation, I'm worthy just as I am.
Hmm.
And I can
Love
have all
that.
these successful pieces is a totally different approach.
How do you help physicians or just the people that you work with in general find success outside of just their career? Like, I'm sure there's a lot to it, but how would you
Mhm.
approach that?
Yeah, and bringing that thread through. So we really do establish a foundation of worthiness so that the lens of success is very different. And we think about perspectacles, and I've heard it from Glennon Doyle. There's other people who have used that term. So if you're always looking for the good or for the health, right, in osteopathic medicine, or you're always looking for the trap or the failure, you will see it, right? That is
Hmm.
confirmation bias that is
Yep.
inherent to us as humans. And so if we start to look at what successes have I already had, and we'll look for the big ones, right? Again, I went to medical school. I finished this residency. I, established this new treatment style. All of those are great, but also like I showed up to yoga class, right? I cooked dinner for my kids, or I had this outburst with my partner and I repaired it, right? So can we find success in different
Hmm.
ways? And so a lot of the times it's not can you do something differently? It's can you start to see what you're already doing through a different lens? And then from there, right, you're certainly welcome to build success in new ways and have different goals for achievement. But that's really where we start in the majority of our programs. It's just, can we start to look for it? And then can you celebrate it? Because so
Hmm.
often, even just like seeing your patient panel, a lot of times it's like, well, that's just my responsibility. I'm supposed to do that. But you did it. You always have a choice. You could have not shown up today, but allowing for those things that seem pretty rudimentary and standard to still count as success.
I could definitely do a better job in that category.
Hmm.
Thank you
Yeah.
for saying that. Appreciate
And
it.
I think we all can. I'll talk to my friends sometimes, and my life looks very different now. Even pre-abdominal tear, I'm now healed, but my life is much less busy. And sometimes I'll think I didn't do
Yeah.
anything today, and then I'll sit and say, okay, what did you actually do? Right, and you list out, and they might not be world transformative things, but it's right. Like I got my kids to school, and I took these coaching
Hmm.
calls, and I made this outreach, and again, I spent time with this podcast, and all of
Yeah.
those can still count. And right, you can still have those landmark moments, but yeah, give yourself permission to see success where it already is.
And I love that. That's a great reminder for me too, just to find success every single day, celebrate the small
Mhm,
wins. I think I
mhm.
typically do a morning gratitude practice, but
Yeah.
maybe I'll add
Mhm.
like, what am I proud of the last 24 hours? I think that
Mm.
this is
Yeah,
just me,
absolutely.
me in real time giving you feedback. I think that'd
Mhm.
be really valuable for me. How
Yeah,
does a high
absolutely.
achiever know that they become indispensable to everybody
Mm.
except for themselves?
Yeah, and I would challenge that as either a goal or a truth, right? So we want to
Hmm.
be indispensable and we also don't, In
Yeah.
one way, we wanna have value and merit, and at the same time, pretty much, right? And there may be some unique relationships, but essentially the world would probably keep spinning, right? If you didn't do your job, like some things might, be hazardous, but by and large, we are replaceable. And now we
Yeah.
could look to that from that mothering question, right? In certain relationships, certainly not, right? Like to your partner, to your children, like there's no replaceability. And at the same time, my dad passed away when I was 14. So there's an irreplaceability of that, but you do figure it out, right? You figure out how to fill those dad roles in those spaces. So just remembering that it's a both and there too. So, it's
Hmm.
one thing to make yourself meaningful, but I would say sometimes even in your job, maybe you don't want to be indispensable because do you want a whole system to collapse because you're not there? Or do you want to be on call, right? 24/7 if you're a physician, if you're the only one in that specialty, that's exhausting. I have a friend who isn't one of two OBs, right, in her county. And like that's a lot, right? Because even though it's maybe a smaller populace, you're always on or you're on the majority of the time. So I would offer that up first of all. And remember, like you just said, the true indispensability is actually to yourself. Like that's the
Hmm.
only one that is steadfast, is you are always going to be the only you that shows up for you. And that's why, right, nourishing yourself and honoring yourself and committing to your own health is so important because you can, right, fill in those gaps in relationships and work and pieces, but you can't find another you. So I think that's the key measure when we think about that word and that concept.
That's really interesting. I don't know if you've heard of Alex Hormozy at all in the
Hmm.
business space. I went to a scaling workshop in Vegas
Hmm.
last fall. It's all about
Yeah.
scaling your business. And he
Hmm.
owns acquisition.com, and they own a portfolio of companies doing probably hundreds of millions of dollars at this point.
Yeah.
And my biggest takeaway from that was to become less important.
Hmm.
And I am wealth.
It really is, and it's something that we have to really flip our mindset on because you do all
Yeah.
this training, right? And you want to, you are this pinnacle and you want to be the top recruit and you want to have meaning when you're there, but you want to be also able to take vacation, right? And to
Yeah.
step away. And again, if you aren't there anymore, like what is the network? And I think that's kind of the anti-fragile concept too. If you build a system that's 100% dependent on one person or thing or, way of being or product,
Yeah.
that thing goes away, it's done, right? There's no stability or sustainability within it. So, of course, there's going to be niche surgeons, right? And people who are in
For
very,
sure.
acute sub specialties. And at the same time, like we said, if that's your full identity, what does
Mm,
happen if that's, if you're injured? I had
yeah.
a music director in college who was a, virtuoso violinist. And then unfortunately, right, had neurological damage, couldn't play with his hands. So
Mm,
became a director, right? Was able to pivot, but it's like, what are those sustainable measures so I still exist and I still have meaning beyond just this one subset within my life?
yeah. And they call it key man risk in business,
Mhm,
essentially. So that might
mhm.
be a good question for the listener to reflect on. Where in
Yeah.
your life have you become the key man? And do you need to
Mhm,
become less important
mhm.
in any areas of your life? And something to I mean, not that we don't want to serve and help others, but also like if I recruit more people, more advisors,
Mhm.
and then I can positively impact the lives of more people instead of just
Yeah.
being 100% indispensable and everything's dependent on
Mhm.
me, right?
And it doesn't mean there won't be a void, right? And there,
For sure.
that you matter. And I think there too, it ties back to that original question of self care,
Mm,
because let's say you are, the only one doing everything for your kids, and then if you are, gone for work or gone for this other thing, like we need to build in those layers of support. And that's really a big part of like looking after kindly, if it is just me for me, we have to have that solid foundation. But what are those other measures that are in place so that, my absence or my sick day or whatever it is isn't catastrophe to the whole system.
yeah, and I know a lot of physician spouses probably struggle with that. Like they're keeping they're the household operating system,
Mhm,
and then the
mhm.
physician goes and
Yeah,
makes the money. And I know a lot of them
yeah,
struggle with that too. What are some
absolutely.
what are some early warning signs that someone is disappearing from the center of their own life?
Mm. Yeah, I think we've highlighted some of them. It's like, do I even know who I am? What do I want?
Yeah.
What do I need? What's important to me? What are my values? If we can't answer those questions effectively, and I would start to say this really ties into the measures of burnout, right? So if we start to feel disconnected, we're no longer excited to go to work if that has been a place where it is, or again, if we have time off from work, is there anything you would even do? Do you have friends that you would call, right? So what is that richness in your life? And so I would say, and it's okay to be a person who likes solitude, right? Not everyone is going to fill time away from work with, high level social engagements, but do you have some strong relationships in your life? Do you have friends you could call? If you are a partnered person, do you feel connected to that human, right? Again, could you open up and share with them? Are you receptive to them if we start to get snappy? And of course, we're going to have,
Mm,
short fuses on certain days, but can I, listen and speak to the people in the home where I live with kindness? And there too, we do put our best face on at work, and that can be kind of our canary in the cave spot. So if that becomes more difficult, right, if we're less compassionate to our patients, that's often when I hear from physicians, right? I can't even like keep it together in those spaces. I'm annoyed by these patients. So we say, okay, right, like what else is going on? That usually means, right, my battery is drained and,
Mm,
my cup is not full. And so I think those are some of the markers, and certainly we all have different baseline personalities, right? Some of us are more effusive than others. But in general, right, if you have a sense of your character over time and you don't recognize, right, who's showing up in these various rooms of your life, that's when you start to say, okay, what is the disconnect and
mm,
how can I really plug back in to that? And maybe for some of us, how can I establish it for the first time, to be honest, right? Because we have been external achievement driven and we've gotten all of those things, right? You've gotten to pretty much the peak of where you can be clinically or administratively, and you still think, huh, like I don't feel how I expected to feel here. Maybe I have to go way back to the beginning
mm,
and establish like what actually matters to me. And I think that
mm.
lends itself to the success question. If I've achieved all the successes and I still don't feel how I think I should feel, can I have a conversation around that?
Yeah. Based on everything we've talked about so far, you've given a lot of great intel in a very short
Hmm.
amount of time. I
Yeah.
love the high energy you bring. What do you think would be like one action item for our listener to do? And maybe it is just asking
Hmm.
themselves that like success question. But what do you think would be like the number one thing you'd recommend someone go do right
Yeah.
this second?
I think saying, what do I need?
Mm,
And in like anything, it's not going to be a single part question. So if you say, what do I need? And I would encourage you to write it down, like pen to paper, or write pencil to paper,
yeah.
write it down and then look at that. And if you're willing, the follow up question would be, how is this need already being met? And like who is already meeting this need? And so that begins to show you, because oftentimes you might think none of my needs are being met. And when you start this exercise, you might say, oh, right, if you think I need to be prioritized or I need to be cared for, you might notice, oh, this friend called me last week, right? And, or this, nurse brought me coffee, or whatever those things might be. And so give yourself a moment to say, how is this need already being met? And can I meet this need for myself?
Mm,
And so if we just ask those series of questions, it can start to expose again what already exists. And that lends itself to that success question. And then if there are gaps, notice if all those needs are being met by one person, you probably again need to diversify because you also don't want to make someone else your one indispensability
yeah.
for your happiness and support and need, you know, meeting in your life. So that would be my action invitation for
I'm gonna
you.
have some good pen to paper action items in my next journaling session.
Yeah.
When does caring for other people quietly become someone's identity? Or I guess to rephrase that, like when should it be like somewhat alarming when like, caring
Hmm.
for other people quietly becomes someone's like identity?
Yeah, and this is a loaded question, I think, especially
Yeah,
for right physicians who are
for
giving care on lots
sure.
of levels. And so we can look at it from the clinical perspective because, of course, that's what you're supposed to be doing, right?
Right.
And it is your identity, right? It's your name, it's your specialty, it's your profession, it's your livelihood, all
Oh,
of those pieces. So it's okay to notice that, right? Of course, this is a key part. Are we still connected here?
can you
Let's see.
no. Can you hear me?
Did it pause there?
Test, test, test. Can you hear me?
That was weird. Yeah, I have full bars, but I'm not sure. You froze too. I don't know.
Oh, that was weird. It was literally
Yeah.
like you're still
So it's at that
frozen
20-minute
on
mark.
you're still
The
frozen
video.
on my screen. I'll make a note of the 20-minute. Hold on.
Yeah. We'll
That
go
was
off
like a
that one.
hard a hard freeze.
Yeah, it was weird because I say my internet's at full
Let's
bars,
make a
but
note. Hold on.
tech is a thing.
Oh yeah, always is.
Mhm.
All good.
Mhm. Do you know where just let me restart the answer to that question?
Yeah, I feel like I didn't ask that question the best way. I was trying to like phrase
Yeah.
it in the way that actually like made
Yeah.
sense.
You can re-ask and we can start again.
Um,
Or I can just start answering, yeah.
okay, well, yeah, we'll jump back in. When does
Mhm.
caring for other people quietly become someone's identity, and when should that
Mhm.
become like a oh crap, I should think more about this?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to notice because it's literally your identity, right? In medicine, like, it's in your title, it's in your specialty, it's in your
Yeah,
day-to-day practices. So on some level, it should like be part of who you are. But if it's the all consuming and then looking outward, do you only again ever take care of everyone around you? People always calling you for curbside consults because you have this special information. And what this really speaks to, like, do you have boundaries? So where
yeah,
does that line get drawn? And that could look like, do you leave on time, right? Do you always see the extra patient? And again, those things sound great. But I had this posed to me once and I thought it was so powerful. If one patient came to your office at, 4:55, okay, you'd squeeze them in. Well, what if 100 patients came? So like, how do you make those distinctions? And sometimes you do just have to have hard stops. Now,
mm,
again, the caveat always is, of course, right? If somebody came in and was crashing, like you would make those exceptions. I think we all would, right? In the Good Samaritan principles that we would carry.
For
But
sure.
noticing like it is okay to say no. And I offer this triad to my clients of rest, rejuvenate, deplete. And so it's
Hmm.
one thing if caring for people is rejuvenating for you. I would say it's not restful, right, in any way, shape, or form. Rest comes in pretty narrow spaces like sleep. Maybe sometimes reading a like turn page book oftentimes is a place that happens. But rest is pretty particular and it's necessary, right? You have to have a foundation of rest. Rejuvenate is this really interesting bucket, right? It can be a lot of different things. For some of us, it's socializing. For some of us, it's movement, and if caring for people lives in that rejuvenation space, it can be okay, right? For that
Hmm.
to really take up more of it. And that really does depend on personality, right? You like how you rejuvenate, if you're introvert, extrovert, all those different factors. But the one to watch for is the deplete bucket. And I think this is where this question can be answered well. There are things we think should be rejuvenating for us, but they're actually depleting if we're honest about how they are.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so
I
if
love
we've
this.
crossed over, and I think this is again, boundaries and people pleasing really factor in here. Like, are you just saying yes because you think you should, or you feel bad saying no, or you don't know how to, disappoint someone? And so that's where you have to start to check in. And it's a fine line. And some things we can shift between categories. Like you can make something restful sometimes, right? Again, if you can caveat it in, you can also take something that's restful and realize it's actually rejuvenating because it gives to me, but not 100% sustainably, right? It also takes like a rejuvenating experience,
Hmm.
still requires energy from you, where a resting activity is only, right, repleting your empty bucket. But a depleting thing is just draining, right? It's just an open drain. Now, and some things we have to do that just are, right? There are things that are depleting, which is why we need rest. But you
Hmm.
could use mindset to pivot between those two. So if something is depleting and you can look at it and say, actually, I do gain XYZ from this, it might move into the rejuvenation spectrum. But the real checkpoint for physicians is to say, are there things that I think should be rejuvenating that really aren't? Like if I honestly look at these, they
Yeah.
are totally draining me, right? They aren't, contributing in any way, shape, or form. And to be honest about that. And then again, you have to do fewer of them. And that is the extra patient or the extra call or the taking every question that's posed to you, and it can feel like you don't have choice. And I hope, and I assume this is what you talk with a lot of your clients about, is like you do. Like we have
Yeah.
much more agency than we think. And so I would encourage you to think about that. So we're going to talk about another action item, like write it down. What's restful, what's rejuvenating, and what's depleting. And in the rejuvenation column, I would challenge you to look at some of those things and say, like, is it really, because I think we want it to be, right? We want to be able to do all the things and care for everyone,
Yeah.
but it's generally not possible. And so we have to find those margins more
I
effectively.
love those three buckets. Do you encourage
Mhm.
people to do it, or would you encourage the listener to do it with both
Mhm.
personal and professional life? I imagine.
For sure, and you could just
Yeah.
do it globally, right, to start, just like, what are the things? And again, I think we're also gonna be surprised, rest, it's pretty small, and especially we learn to sacrifice sleep, right, through the practice of medicine, and there too, we all have a different variety, like, I do require less sleep, like, I think I literally have some of the genetic requirements to require less sleep, but
Yeah.
even within that, we always, right, try to eke out, like, as much productivity without that as we could, and for those who need more sleep, truly, it almost feels like a letdown. I feel like, "Oh my gosh, I need 9 hours of sleep," and they almost feel bad about it. And it's like, "Well, that's your constitution, right?
For
That's your
sure.
physiology, and it's okay." And then you have to be honest about it, and that means, right, the other 2 buckets are just smaller. And you're allowed to grieve that because it is nice, right, to need less rest and to have more hours in the day, and at the same time, we have to work with what we have. We talk about that in yoga, like, we don't work toward the posture how it should be. It's like, how is your body moving today? And so
Love that.
I encourage that across the board. You can take it personally, professionally, but in general, it's like in my life, what are the things I'm doing on a regular basis and where do they go?
Hmm.
And so maybe I'm a color coded type person. So it's like, what did I do today or what did I do in the last week? Write it all down and then pick your highlighter colors, right? And like which things are restful, which are rejuvenating, which are depleting. And then give yourself the opportunity to do a little shuffle, with some that you might be miscategorizing.
Just out of curiosity to help out the listener, like,
Hmm.
could you provide a few examples of maybe some of those categories for you currently? Like what
Yeah.
falls under rest, what falls under rejuvenation, what's depleting?
For sure. So for me, rest is pretty much sleep, and I do love a nap. And ironically, I'll share this year, like the 26-minute power nap has always been this thing. My daughter's birthday's on the 26th. I don't know. It was always a thing. It's like it was a perfect amount of time. And then I found out that's the NASA proven duration of time because it
I
doesn't
love
allow you
that.
to fall into like depth of sleep where you wake up groggy. So I was like, oh, I'm like a, astronaut or a rocket scientist. So I would say looking at that, right? So if you can't, ideally, right, full hours of sleep that you need, And I do think sitting still with a book is different. I listen to a lot of things. I listen to them fast, as you can probably imagine, because I talk quickly. I listen to things quickly. But to actually have to sit and look at a book and turn the page is pretty restful. And a lot of times it might invite you to sleep, so there's those
Hmm.
factors. I will say probably they're what I call like the nap time yoga, right? Like yin yoga or restorative are pretty close to restful, right? Because you never stand up, and they
Yeah,
also allow you to just practice being still, and that one it could tip, right? Because other forms of yoga become more rejuvenating. Like they do give energy, but they require energy and
for sure.
participation. So just noticing that. And so a rejuvenation bucket is really big, right? And that's the one to proceed with caution. Because for me, I can fill it up with all kinds of movement, right? Take a bike ride or call a friend, so noticing all those different ways that can happen. And that's a big part of how I spend my day. And I would say within that, where I have to be more honest is when I am like being gracious and volunteering my time. It can be rejuvenating, but I need to check on that. Like I help
Hmm.
coach children's sports, for example, and there's benefit to it, but sometimes like 12-hour track meet is going to fall into the depleting column. So even
Yeah,
though there's
yeah.
there's benefit from it, if I'm really honest, it's probably a net negative, right? Like it's exhausting. So I'm glad I'm doing it, but I have to be honest that it's going to cost more energetically than it's returning. And so those are the ones I would kind of look at. And then other things that are depleting, like yard work. I don't like it at all. So some people they might love it. And that's the other thing is like there's no hard answer
Yeah.
because my mom and my sister, they could spend 12 hours in the garden and feel like they had the best day ever. I pull weeds for 10 minutes. I'm like, I hate this. And
Let's
so
go
some of it's
hire someone.
you know, and there is an opportunity. I could make it less depleting by saying, I'm contributing to the aesthetics of my neighborhood or, like whatever it is, I can find some
For sure.
Pollyanna version. But that's why this is a personal exercise because your replete excuse me, deplete rejuvenation might be different than someone else's. And this is particularly important in partnerships, right? So like in romantic relationships, because for you, you might think like, why you don't want to do this, or you've reached this capacity, but for them, it might be a depleting activity that for you
Hmm.
is rejuvenating. And so I think particularly that's an area that I coach physicians on a lot is relationship management because they can, right, take the brunt of our energetic losses because we give so much of it to the workspace is to recognize what is mutually rejuvenating here. So that's kind of the next layer of this exercise is you could take it to your partnership, and
Hmm.
say, these are the things that are rejuvenating for me. You're like, oh, these are depleting for you. Like we probably shouldn't, we shouldn't either do them together or not prioritize them, but can we find some that overlap? Can our Venn diagrams have that common space?
Hmm.
So, or just at least awareness, right? Like for me, this is rejuvenating. For you, it's depleting. They're still willing to do it because it's important to you, but recognize they might need some recharge after it that you might not. And I think particularly amongst physicians, generally speaking, and it's not always the rule, but we do have pretty high capacity, right? You almost have to, right, to survive all the layers and levels of training and practice. So other people might not, right? Other people might not have the same capacity. So having some compassion for that as well.
This is so great. When you're talking about the partners, I was thinking my wife Steph and I like she gets total joy and relaxation out of like hand washing the dishes, and to
Mm,
me, it's like nails on a chalkboard. So I think that's like
yep.
a perfect example. I'm like, how do you enjoy this? It's like there's a
Hmm.
dishwasher.
Absolutely.
It's
That it
funny.
is kind of meditate. I'm with her. Like to me, and that's
Yeah,
also if I get peopled out, it's a nice way to just, I'm being helpful and productive, but like quietly by
quietly.
myself.
Yeah. Little
Yeah.
introverted moment. I love
Yes,
that.
absolutely.
Something I've done every year too, and this is more of a bigger project, but it's like a calendar audit of your last 12 months. And I could typically go to like a coffee shop, get super caffeinated, look at my calendar and look at my photos for the last year. And I categorize it like
Mm,
things to leave behind, things to
mhm.
bring forward, and then like best of the best, like joy of
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
kind of reminded me of it, but I feel like you could do this like you could audit
Mhm.
this on a weekly basis versus like that's something
Yeah.
I do once a year. But it
Mhm.
has really changed how like, every year I do it, my joy list
Yeah.
gets
You're more
longer
purposeful. Yeah. More
and my
purposeful in what you bring in.
for sure, and it's just the
Yeah. I love
intentionality.
that practice.
But I like
And
this,
yeah.
I was gonna say
Go
the
ahead.
rest rejuvenate, deplete, I feel like I could almost do
Mhm.
that on, like, a weekly basis, and it would take, like, 10 minutes, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. It can be a really quick inventory. And there too, if you have it kind of in your vernacular, you can also, if I like, man, I feel terrible. And it's a good opportunity to just be like, my deplete bucket's probably really big
Full.
this week.
Yeah.
And again, the options are right to actually cut the thing. It's always like external circumstances do matter. And then there is the opportunity, like, am I viewing this, in a way that could be more helpful to pivot, and I'm always cautious with coaching. It isn't just like do everything the same and just feel better about it, right? Like pick a happy
Right.
thought and go. But there are some spaces, in charting, right? For physicians, charting is that big albatross. And certainly it could be depleting and it might just live in the depleting bucket. But if we can start to give it a little nuance of this is good patient care, right? Like,
Mm,
because it is like,
mhm.
it's one more thing I have to do. It only can be depleting, but this is good patient care, right? This communicates my expertise, and again, it has to be real and believable. But the important thing is if it is something you have to spend a lot of time doing, right? And if I know I'm not going to counteract it with a rest activity, because it's so big in that part of our lives, unfortunately, medicine can be so big. It's
Yeah.
how can I, right, give it a little less weight in the
Yeah.
deplete column so it's not so draining. Like you still got to do it. It's a thing that's going to happen. It's just ask yourself, is there any other way to look at this? If the answer is no, that's okay. And then you just have to know, I literally have to build in rest for this, right? I have to
Mm,
counteract this with some kind of restful thing. And whether that's more sleep or even just like, you know, or a rejuvenation, like a walk in the woods, right? Like something to counterbalance how draining that was for you. I think
right.
that's an important thing to notice.
Definitely. Yeah, I
Mhm.
like that a lot. I know a while back, I thoroughly enjoyed
Mhm.
this part of the conversation.
Yeah.
You mentioned boundaries.
Mm, mhm.
How do you help high achievers set better boundaries?
Yeah, this is probably one of the hardest things, right? Worthiness and boundaries are probably the 2 biggest concepts, and we hit a lot of walls, because again, we're just taught, right, to be in service and to care for others and to give as much as you can, right? And in medicine particularly, there is this badge of honor, right? You stay late, you don't ask about the hours. We've literally had to like legally, enforce limitations, but they also don't translate beyond residency. There is no limitation for how long somebody could be on call once they are, out in their own practice, which is wild because, right, driving truck or flying a plane, like all of those have very strict impositions of time.
Yeah,
And physicians like, hey, you just keep going, right? Operate out, like cut somebody open if you've been
for
on
sh
call for, 80 hours. And so it's built in. So like learning boundaries is completely countercultural. It's a totally new mindset and absolutely necessary. So it starts with worthiness because you have to believe, right? My time is worth as much as
Mm,
everyone else's,
I love that.
and so that's a necessary starting point. And then remembering that boundaries are yours, right? So we often confuse boundaries with ultimatums and requirements of others. It's like you can't do this. It's like, well, if you do this, this is what I will do, right? So it's establishing a
Mm,
consequence. And again, that's with patients, you need to have them with patients, right? That's also managing a patient visit well. I will talk about this number of things, right? Or I'll make sure within, if it's 2 minutes left on the time that they have, like we will close the conversation this way. And it's reclaiming your control and authority. And the equation I love here, right? I love triads of things is power, control, and responsibility. And so looking at boundaries, it's, if I take responsibility for something I can't control, I have depleted all my power, right? So noticing again, what am I assuming here? And in medicine, it's tricky because you are made responsible. For a surgeon, for example, they have a 90-day, right, global rate for any complication that happens post-operatively. And that's good clinical responsibility. And of course, you take care of the patient, but you have to remember that you aren't in control of all those variables, right? So it's like you don't know if the patient went home and maintained, right, like accurate or appropriate bandaging of the wound or what they're, if they started to smoke again, if their nutrition is adequate or just luck of the draw, right? They had some random exposure. And so it's remembering within that, like I can be responsible for the care, but I'm not responsible for the actions. And that's also where we start to build better boundaries. And so noticing where you again are feeling that depletion, or often if you start to feel angry, anger is the number one feeling that indicates to you that a boundary has been crossed. And we
mm,
often find out about them retroactively. It's great, and it's like high level, integrated self to know all your boundaries ahead of time. But generally speaking, we learn them right after they have been violated and then we implement them. So it is, you know, the system keeps scheduling like all these people in the last 10-minute slot of my day. So you have to say, I'm willing to see this many patients, but if they're scheduled at, 4:55, like I'm no longer seeing those patients. And now we can talk about repercussions of employment and all those pieces. But I think you'd also be surprised that, a system will continue, right, to enforce things upon you or assume you will do them until, right, you say
yeah.
something and speak up. So those are the ways that boundaries come into play. And in relationships, it can be like, don't talk to me that way. But if it is, when you speak to me like that, I'm going to take 10 minutes, right? And pause and reflect, and we'll come back together
Hmm,
when we're both ready to proceed. And so it's like, what can I control within this? Because also, if you're giving boundaries and telling the other person they need to do this thing, once again, you have assumed responsibility for something you can't control, which is the
hmm,
behavior of another person, which means you have no power, right? So that's the antithesis of a boundary. So when you're making them, what do I need, right? What has indicated to me that it's been crossed? And then how am I creating this consequence that's entirely within my control?
Interesting. I That's a very unique way to look at boundaries, and I never thought about it in the light of like the power, control, and
Mhm.
responsibility, and versus just telling someone what to do, saying like,
Mhm.
when you do this or talk to me like this, I'm going to take a 10-minute hiatus and go get my
Mhm.
life together and thoughts together, and then come back and we can talk afterwards. I like that a
Yeah.
lot.
And it's useful in parenting, right? In partnership, like all of
Yeah.
this translates into useful in how you talk to staff, all of those spaces. And I think about this, if people are, let's say, navigating a relationship, we often think like, you need to XYZ change. It's like, no, I need to get clear on what I'm willing to tolerate.
Hmm.
And it does. And here's the thing, creating a boundary is pretty low level. Maintaining it and enforcing it, that's where the work happens because you're going to get uncomfortable because it requires you to follow through on what you said. And usually, right, it does mean like taking a new action that's uncomfortable for you. So let's say it's a relationship, right? And XYZ has been happening. You're like, look, if this happens again, I have to remove myself. Then you got to do it, right? Because then if you don't, your word has lost all merit, So it's same thing in parenting, right? Like if there is a consequence you've established, the follow through, that's the critical piece. Because you could create, right, a million beautiful boundaries, but if you aren't willing to enforce them, they have no power once again there. So that's the piece. And that's where coaching really comes into play is like, what is it like? What urge do you have to fight to actually truly uphold this effectively?
Mm-hmm. And I think, a big takeaway from this segment
Hmm.
is starting to think about who are you when you're not producing. I mean, I think that's the
Hmm.
biggest thing I'm taking away so far. And I
Hmm.
like categorizing things in like the rest, rejuvenate, deplete, and
Hmm.
can help, imagine, to define success outside of just traditional medicine or job or
Right.
career or whatever it is. I want to talk a little bit more. I know we opened with the mother yourself
Hmm.
idea, but tell us one more time, like, what does self-mothering actually mean, and why does it feel
Hmm.
selfish?
Mm. Yeah, selfish is such an interesting word, right? Because it's necessary, and internal family systems is kind of a form of family therapy and an approach to understanding oneself. And here's my plug, right? I wrote a book that goes through the lens of the Princess Bride that outlines internal family systems in kind of a playful way. But the goal for all of us is to be a more integrated self, and that
Hmm,
means to be more in touch with all of us, to recognize that we have wounded parts, but that ultimately we have this inner wisdom if we allow ourselves to be curious and compassionate and confident. And within that, selfishness is necessary, right? We always think about that, right? You have to put your own mask on before you can, help somebody else. And that's
yeah.
totally true, right? Because if you are not at your at least, minimum capacity, but if you're ideally not your fullest capacity, you can't take ideal care of patients and you can't show up in relationships fully. And so thinking of it through the lens, because physicians are going to be other oriented, but we have this phrase, physician heal thyself, right? It's like, what can I do for myself that will allow me to take better care of my patients? And I would love for it to just happen because you should do it anyway. But I also accept that in general, that's a motivator, right? So
Yeah.
doing this, and for me, it's like doing this makes me a better mom. So for me, it is like, I know, right? If I go to the gym regularly, like I have done something that allows me to show up more fully and completely, or when I go to yoga classes,
Hmm,
or when
mhm,
I have time with my friends, right? So I am repleting these things in myself so that I can show up better for my patients, to coach better, to parent better. And so if we put it through that lens, I think that allows us to see that it's not selfish, it's actually necessary, right? In order for me to provide the care that I want, or to be right in these relationships in the way that I want, if I skip this, it's actually a disservice to the
hmm,
people in my lives because I'm going to be grumpy, right? I'm going to be like less accurate, all these different ways. We know if we don't sleep well and if we aren't, that's the first I remember in medical school, right? They gave you the halt. Don't be, hungry, angry, lonely, tired,
mhm,
because you're going to show up poorly for
hmm.
people. You can't your brain doesn't work as well, your body doesn't work as well. And so if your motivation still is right to be the best physician or XYZ you can be, it has to be from the core of taking care of you. And, I talk to physicians on a regular basis and they just say, I don't know, right? Like I know they know what they should do, right? I should eat these foods and I should go to the gym and I should sleep, but oftentimes they won't, and some is because they want to reclaim their time for whatever way they wanna do it. It might just be vegging out, on the couch, or it's this resistance to why should I deserve this care? And the
Mm.
answer generally is because you do, right? Because you're worthy and because it is necessary, right, to continue doing all these things in life well.
I wanna jump back to I'll come back to it in one second, but I wanna
Mhm,
ask you a question first, like, how do
mhm,
you view or define guilt? I feel like I know a
mm,
lot of people who, when they take care of themselves and they're not,
mhm.
or even, like, if they're resting, they feel guilty. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
how would you define guilt, and why do you think that happens, and what would you say to somebody who feels that way?
And I think two things are important, right? Guilt and shame, right? Guilt is a natural human emotion, right? That we have if we don't do something we think we should do. Shame is like, I think I'm a bad person. So guilt is like, I didn't do this thing, so I feel bad about it. Shame is like, I'm terrible as a result.
Mm,
So distinguishing those two, right? If you find you're in shame a lot, right? That's something you really need to unpack on a core level. Guilt usually tells you, right? I'm out of alignment with something, right? So it's actually a helpful feeling, just like anger, right? Anger
interesting.
tells you a boundary has been crossed. But guilt is like, you're like, what am I doing that's not matching? And why am I feeling guilty? And so, if I'm experiencing guilt, is it because I had this thought, now I'm a bad mom because I took, an hour and went to yoga? And you stop and you say, is that true? Right? Like,
Mm.
do good moms never go to yoga? Right? Like, have I created some weird binary or, very black and white thinking around that? And is there
Right.
any other version of this that could be true? And who said that is also a thing. Like, did somebody say to you, oh, must be nice to go to yoga? I spend every minute of my day with my kids, right? So it might be an external driver, it might be an
Mm,
internal narrative that we have. And so if you're feeling guilty, stop and say, why am I feeling guilty? And usually it's because I shouldn't have done that, right? That's kind of the common statement. And then you say, why? Why shouldn't I have done that? Because good moms, right, don't go to yoga. They go right home after work and they take care of their kids.
mm,
And then you can pause and say, is that the only truth available here? Right? Because it could be
mm,
true, right? That's one version of a true perspective and reality. But the other truth is like, you know what? If I go to this yoga class, I show up, right? And I'm more connected and I'm more interactive and I'm showing my kids this, physical movement and investing in yourself is valuable, right? So we start to open the space for other narratives. So I wouldn't eschew guilt, right? Again, shame, totally different story. And they can feel kind of
yeah.
similar. But if shame's like, I'm a terrible person versus guilt, I shouldn't have done that. Stop and say why. And sometimes like, it might be fair, right? You
Yeah.
might have done something that is kind of like irresponsible or inappropriate, but trusting yourself to make that discernment is also key because it is, if it's like, I was at yoga for 6 hours, right? And my kids didn't get dinner, right? That's a different story. Do you know what
For
I mean?
sure.
And so guilt can actually, like, it's informative, but check in and see, like, is that the only truth? And it might be, yeah, like a 6 hour yoga workshop where I didn't have any like care or dinner plan. That's probably not good parenting. And guilt is a helpful
Yeah.
emotion, right? To come through and tell you that. But if you can punch some holes in the narrative and say, like, like, am I going to continue to ascribe to these ways of being? Is it helpful for me? And, you know, can I then allow myself to say, because my time is valuable and this actually makes me a better parent? And you might notice that the feeling shifts.
Mm. Yeah, and I think a lot of that, even like for me personally with guilt, is like potential expectations or others. If I like go
Hmm.
do something for myself and
Hmm.
people are like, well, why didn't you hang out with us? Or, a lot of times it'll be
Hmm.
like I'm on vacation. I'm like, all right, I'll see
Yeah.
you guys later. I need to admit to myself I'm going for a
Hmm.
run. And they're like, well, no,
Hmm.
wait for us, and then I feel like guilty about it. So
Yeah.
I think it's
And that's the other
often,
part is like we can
yeah,
notice impact on others, but there too, like, should you assume responsibility for them? And that's not to say, right? Like, if you're
right,
always getting feedback, like, man, you never hang out then, like you're always neglecting your core relationships. Again, it can be informative,
for
but you
sure.
can say, oh, that's true for them. I can acknowledge it. And maybe it is. You're right. Like, so I'm still gonna go from this run, but like, let's play cards when I get back. So you can
For
navigate
sure.
that with more, again, awareness. And discernment is one of my favorite things because judgment, right? It's judgy, but discernment, like we want to be able to make these decisions and choices. And so these feelings are actually like lending you more material to make them effectively.
How would you define discernment? Just out of curiosity.
Discernment is, it's like the inner knowing, right? Connecting to your inner knowing. And that's what
Okay.
being in touch with your feelings is so important, right?
I
Because
see.
again, guilt can be a great barometer screen.
Mm,
It's just if we have been trained, right, to always feel guilty about everything, it's less helpful. But if you can know, okay, guilt comes in, it tells me I shouldn't have done that thing because it's a pretty common narrative, and now I can trust myself to go in and say, well, is that true, right? Like, and would I do it again? And what was the impact? And is the impact okay with me, right? So you can kind of follow this series of questions. So discernment is making decisions, right, with this kind of deep inner knowing and wisdom, and ideally, right, tapped into the greater wisdom of the universe, however you participate in that.
mm.
Judgment, right, is like casting dispersions, right? Judgment is saying that's good, that's bad. Discernment is making a decision, right, from that place of wholeness and inner wisdom.
Oh, I see. Okay. That makes
Hmm.
sense. So
Yeah.
coming back a couple minutes ago, I said we're going to come back to this. So you said,
Hmm.
you often see people that know that they should change, but they
Hmm.
don't. If
Hmm.
the person listening with us right now is
Yeah.
feeling that way, like what would you tell them or what would
Hmm.
be like their first step?
Yeah. And should, right? We talk about that a lot here. It's like the semantic satiation will lose all meaning. But, I think it is like, who says? So I was talking with someone the other day and they have a weight loss goal, totally valid. And one of their friends said, you keep talking about this. Maybe you're just like, can you just be at peace with the weight you are? Which could sound like resignment, right? And
Mm,
just resignation, and you're just not
mhm.
going to ever do anything. And I offered up, well, maybe that's not a bad idea, right? So if you have spent 5 years, let's say 10 years at this weight that you're at, which you know is probably not your ideal body weight, and you have a certain goal to be at a different body weight, but could your starting point not be like, oh, like I got to lose this weight, I don't like this body, whatever that is, to say, this is the weight I've been, right? And I accept that this is a weight my body can exist at. And I'm curious, like, what could my body do? Right. And then
Mm.
it becomes an exploration versus like a mandate. And
Right.
oftentimes, when I talk to people about contentment, they often think complacency. They think if I'm content with however it is that I am right now, I won't change anything.
Mm.
And I would offer that you will change way more things more sustainably and from a much better energy than if you're doing it from this condemnation. Right. And so that's the self energy too. So a part within us would say, right? You're fat. You need to lose weight. Like you're a terrible example to your patients, like get to the gym. And some of us respond to that, right? Some of us respond to more of that kind of like a progressive, but I would say not a lot of us and not
Yeah.
sustainably versus, you know, this is your current body, right? You can love and accept it just as it is. And would it feel better, right? To move a little more effectively, to
Mm,
eat some different foods, to sleep differently. Like,
mm.
how would it feel to show up for yourself and say, I'm a person who regularly exercises, and even if it's 5 minutes a day, and then you start to say, like, I accept and even love how I am right now. And, right, I'm willing to make these changes to explore XYZ. And it's
Mm.
a same movement, right? But very different energy motivating it. And I do recognize some of us do respond to the drill sergeant,
Yeah.
So that kind of like if you write football players and you have those coaches in our mind, maybe, right? But what would happen if you did make peace with however you are, whether that's, your weight or like certain practices you have or habits that you have, and then get curious. What
Mm.
would happen if, what's a different way this body might move, or how would it feel, to aim for this level of weight loss? And it's the same idea, but just a different energy behind it.
Different energy and different mindset shifts, and I've never really,
Mhm.
once again, being achievement oriented, never really thought about it
Mhm.
like that. So that's
Mhm.
really interesting. Helpful to me as well.
Yeah.
Mm,
Because
you
the should, I will just say, too, invites shame, right? And that's that alliterative
right.
piece. Because it's like, as a physician, you know all the things, right? It's like, here are the markers of health and the movement toward it. Like, why can't I do these? And it is like, well, what has been my motivating approach? And so, is there a different version, right? Where
Yeah,
should is no longer part of the equation?
for sure. For sure. Don't should on yourself. I mean,
Mhm,
oftentimes with, with money, a thought that I feel like is typically in physicians' heads, they might not always say it aloud, is like, I should know how to do this because you're so
mhm,
talented, trained, and you're
mhm.
earning it.
Right.
So I understand that. I'm sure that happens in many
Mhm.
areas.
Right.
You talk about the architect effect. What is
Mhm,
that?
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So just this past year, I kind of looked at a different approach to coaching and advisory, and I was watching someone draw a blueprint for a home. And I thought, that's so interesting, right? Because you're strategic and you're structured. Like, why don't we do that for our lives? Right? We'll do this for a house, but like, could we
Mm,
architect relationships? And I originally proposed it kind of in an interpersonal relationship standard, like, hey, we're building this. How would you like it to look, right? Like, what are the components you would want to include and what are mine? And then as I was iterating that more personally, I thought, well, this is really how I coach. It's just giving it, again, more structure and form, and structure and function is a key osteopathic tenet. And so as I approached that, I was like, well, what happens if we build things on purpose? And again, not to over control everything, but to be intentional. And so it
mm,
starts with vision. And this is really, again, that question of like, what do you want? What do you need? And what would amazing look like for you? Because I talk about architecture amazing. And we don't often think of it that way, right? It's like, what's the bare minimum or what are those necessary pieces? But like, if I can cultivate amazing in my life, what would it contain? And then we look at the structural components where we say, okay, what are the pieces you already have, kind of like those success lenses? And then what ones might be getting in the way? Which ones do you need to bring in? And then you put it out there, right? You do
mm,
a version of it and then you see how it works and then you iterate. And that's often the challenging part because we often want to get it perfect, but a lot of times you got to build it, right? It's easier to steer a moving ship than to like move one that's still. And so it's okay, right? To put it out there, to get it wrong, quote unquote, and to try again. And I think for physicians, that's the hardest part because there's not a lot of room for like get it wrong and try again. But in life and in general in business, we just talked about before we started recording, right? It's a constant, of lessons and you
hmm.
either get the result you want or the lesson you needed. I don't see a lot of
For sure.
failure. It's just opportunities to build and learn.
Yeah.
And so that's what the architect effect and it is. It's like when you put right intention and purpose behind it, it doesn't mean everything's going to be exactly as you want it, but it's much more likely, right? If we open it up to like architecture amazing, there's more room to build what you want and need and maybe even beyond what you thought. But it also invites you, like you said, to take those actions and to say, okay, here's a version, right? I'm going to live it for a week or a month. like if you have a fitness goal, and
Yeah.
then at the end of that month, I'll look back and say, what part of this worked and what didn't, and then I'll iterate again. But it's really allowing yourself to build with purpose your life, like just like you would a house.
Where does our listener begin if they wanted to try out the architect effect? Is it like a pen and a piece of
Mhm.
paper and some questions?
Yeah,
Like
I
what
mean,
it
certainly it's a coaching opportunity, right? I work with
yeah.
people to do this directly, but like that first question, like the question we had, what do you need? That's really one of the foundational questions. So if you did that earlier, you've started the process, and then you start to ask, like, who's meeting those needs? You've got the structure piece in there, and then it is like, what is the next step I could take to put this into action? Am I willing to explore it, and then evaluate at the end of some set period of time, a month, a quarter, whatever it is, and then make a modification. And I think
Hmm.
that's a great practice for physicians because, again, we're supposed to have the answers right. You're supposed to get it right that first time in the OR. And
Right.
here, there is more latitude. And I think in finance, too, of course, you don't want to make a lot of, crazy erroneous decisions. But at
Right.
the same time, you don't know, right? There aren't a ton of certainties. And
Yeah,
you want to purposely, right, have a variable portfolio that does have some certainty, but then some element of risk because that's where your reward is gained.
for
And
sure.
that's required too in, life architecture. It's like, man, this really sounds amazing. It might not work out, but I'm willing to explore it to
Hmm.
find out.
I love that. And even
Mhm.
like, if you
Mhm.
think of, I have clients who ask me about like crypto and all this and all, all the
Mhm.
things. And I'm like, maybe just carve out like a small, or like they want to go on
Right.
their own and like trade
Mhm.
options, which I wouldn't even feel
Mhm.
comfortable doing, but they want
Yeah.
to do it. It's like gambling or whatever,
Right. Yeah.
and it's
You
just like
assume
maybe
the
carve
risk and the
out
reward opportunity.
of your free
Mhm.
cash flow, carve out like 5% of
Yeah.
it and go have
Mhm.
fun. Do your thing. And like you said, I think I've had a client who's done
Mhm.
that and had a ton of success doing it. And I was like, just
Yeah.
keep doing it. So
Mhm.
I think that's
Mhm.
really good. And I think you can apply that in many different
Yeah.
areas of your life. To you, what's the difference between building a successful life and building a life you
Mm.
actually enjoy living? I feel like
I
that's a
love
deep
that.
one.
Yeah, no, I love an existential question, and I think again, you get to decide. I think that's the distinction we've talked about earlier. If you allow success to be on your terms, that's the same answer, right? So if
Hmm.
my successful life is what's meaningful for me, because if we've allowed success to be only some outside definitions, it may not be fulfilling for us. And again, some of them might overlap. That's an important thing to notice. You might feel totally fulfilled, right, by your career in those pieces. It might be having children. I've had it posed to me that having children is the number one fulfillment you can have. And I would say maybe, and I'm a parent, right? And that might sound like a terrible thing to say, but I
Yeah.
also know people who are childless by choice or by circumstance who live very fulfilling lives because,
Yeah.
right? It's like, it's really because of the choice of perspective. So if you
Mm,
hold the perspective that this is required for fulfillment and it's not available to you, right? You're guaranteeing failure for
mm.
yourself. And here's where it gets a little tricky. So we talk about goal setting and there's only an and versions of the goal. So if there, whatever it is you can control, if you keep that in your primary bucket, you will always find fulfillment. For example, I think about Tara Woodhall Davis, right? One of the Olympic champion long jumper. And, she has a gold medal. So you might think, well, of course she's successful. But I would wager that her success probably is because it's like, do I show up every day, right? Do I give my all? And she can
Yeah.
control that. She can't control what happens on the day, right? She might footfall. And so if her whole success is wrapped up in that, it's a failure guarantee,
Mm,
right? Or it's definitely not a success guarantee. It can still be there. She's you clearly going to aspire, right, to be the world champion and break the world record, all those different pieces. That goes in the and bucket. And I think keeping those both aware for you is if I can be successful based on the things I can guarantee, which is, how I show up, the effort I give, like all those different pieces, I'm guaranteed to have success and fulfillment. And if I have the and bucket, I can still aspire to things I can't control, right? Because having kids is not a guarantee, right? And the outcome
mm.
of having kids, there's no guarantee. And same in practice, there are things we can't guarantee. So I think that's the key: is have I attributed success and fulfillment to something? Again, that's beyond my control because I have depleted my power. And can I rebuild what success and fulfillment are based on things I can actually control? Which seem less, but they're pretty big, right? It's a pretty big thing to know that I can always control, right? My attitude, my approach, my effort. That's a lot, right? And if you
Mhm.
are doing that, to the best of your ability, and that's allowed to fluctuate because your best ability is going to change, day to day, year to year. And then let all those other goals exist, right? They're allowed to kind of be the complement and they can help move you toward that. But success and fulfillment within the auspices of your direct control kind of means like you're good, you're golden, right? Like
Yeah.
life is guaranteed to be successful for you.
Yeah, I heard a quote from Darren Hardy, and he talked about like 95% of success is like mundane, like Oprah
Mhm.
Winfrey or whomever you envy in
Mhm.
society. Like 95, or
Mhm.
even like Beyonce, like 95%,
Yeah.
she's not on stage,
Mhm. Mhm.
she's in the studio or whatever it is. And
Mhm.
I think you can find, like, if you enjoy the process versus just the
Mhm.
result, you can truly
Exactly.
find a lot more fulfillment and a lot more worth. And sounds like too,
Mhm.
just separating society's viewpoint of, oh, physician
Mhm.
equals success, and that's you and
Right.
you that's your identity,
Mhm. Yeah.
versus actually defining it for yourself and choosing
Mhm.
how to live it every single day.
Absolutely. Mhm.
I want to ask one other super quick question just 'cause I feel like it'd be
Mhm.
relevant. Can you talk
Yeah.
quick about, you use the
Yeah.
phrase the health of all things? Like what does
Mhm.
that mean?
Yeah, it means whatever you think it means, because I also am
I
always
love it.
Princess Bride quoting, and living conceivable is my other, version of my brand. But it really does mean health is all around. I think about that. So we think health and we think physical health, maybe mental health, but really health isn't everything. And I did a health
Yeah.
policy fellowship, and it really was like everything is impacting health, right? Like public transportation is a health metric. And so just beginning to recognize kind of like those success perspectives is like, where can you already see health? And then where is it lacking? And how is it lacking in certain arenas affecting your overall life?
Hmm.
So what is your relationship health, your financial health, right? Your mental health, your behavioral, your spiritual, your energetic, your planetary, like all those different versions of it. And so it's can be overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, I have to make health in all these areas versus it's also an opportunity. Like health can come from so many different spaces. So we can approach it from either way. Like look at all the opportunities, right, to cultivate health in my life. Maybe particularly, perhaps you have a chronic disease, right? And so it feels like physical health doesn't have it. It's like, where else does health
Hmm.
exist? And so for the health of all things is this invitation, right? Get to have a broader view of what health means, where it shows up. And then again, where it might be lacking that's actually undermining you that you don't notice. Because
Hmm.
if you do have robust physical health, but you don't feel good, right? And that happens a lot in medicine. It's like all your labs checked out, right? It's like what else might
Hmm.
be contributing to this? And so I think that's the opportunity I hope to extend, through that
Sounds like
perspective.
the wheel of life. Like, do you have whole
Mhm.
life health, whole life success?
Mhm.
Couple super quick rapid fire
Yeah,
questions for you.
let's do it.
What is one daily non-negotiable for you?
That's a great question. I don't have a common daily practice, but I would say movement of some sort.
Hmm.
It's not always the same thing, but whether that be yoga or weightlifting, moving my body in some
Yeah.
purposeful way always happens.
Could also be like 90%
Yeah.
non-negotiable. 100% a little
Yeah.
tough. Love that.
Mhm.
What's the best boundary you've ever set?
I think it's being able to step away from something that was toxic and not assigning that responsibility to the person contributing to the toxicity, right? So if
Hmm.
this continues to happen, I will walk away because it can be hard to be the one to take that step away
Yeah,
from something. Mhm.
absolutely. Most underrated form of self-care?
Mm. I think just breathing purposefully.
Love
Breath is
that.
super powerful. It happens all the time, but we also have control over it, which I think is beautiful.
Hmm.
So a slow, deep breath is pretty powerful.
One thing that you stopped doing that improved your life?
Mm. I would say overthinking. I would say it's still a
Yeah.
work in progress, but I do it much less, if we allow for that. And yeah, overthinking everything and building a little more self trust as a result.
A book that shaped how you live?
I think The Gift by Edith Eger, who
Hmm.
just recently passed away. Yeah. Mhm.
I love that. I have not read it. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
And a life well lived means to you in this season?
Mm. Showing up fully myself and allowing that to continue to evolve
Hmm.
in all my spaces of life. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you
Mhm.
so much. Where can our
Mhm.
listeners find you if they want to follow you, if they want to book a consult with you? Like what does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah, thisosteopathiclife.com. Is the hub of all of my things. And then on social media, lib_inconceivable is my most active platform.
Awesome. Thank you so
Mhm.
much. You're a wealth of
Yeah,
knowledge
thank
and you're
you.
extremely
Appreciate it. This was
personally
great.
developed. Like that was I'm sure you could have gone for another 10 hours, but
Oh,
you're a
yeah. It was
wealth
a
of
great
knowledge.
conversation. Thank you.
And I really appreciate how you have myself and the listener, like, you pose a lot of questions to think about. And I think that's one of the most
Mhm.
important things that you can do to transform yourself is sit down with a journal and ask yourself questions, deep questions, and
Mhm.
figure out what's going on and how you can change it. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.